and we'll get started here. Oops. Yeah. Okay, so let me wait just a second. I gotta check something if I can draw. Oh, that works. Okay. Yeah, so since Flycatcher season is beginning, I've been getting a lot of emails or texts, folks sharing with me photographs and asking me my views on it. And then I thought, well, if explaining to a few of you, I thought maybe we should just open it up to a broader audience and do it together. And then that got me this idea that, yeah, maybe every May or early May, we should do something like this, kind of a annual tune-up for flycatchers. And I don't know, I just called it birding yoga for some reason. Um, and this workshop is not about specifically our books, but I did want to give credit where it's due. My co-conspirator in crime here is Andy Birch. Here, let me put my pointer here. And he's out in California, and we actually just did a more formal lecture by Zoom yesterday, not interactive, just a lecture, and he was there with me. But he did all the illustrations in here, and that's really what makes these two books so nice, is because his illustrations are so accurate and also very pleasing to look at. But let me start with this flycatcher right here. And you know what I thought I'd do is, if I can get this to work, I think there's this poll. Yeah, let's do this. Just take a little bit of time to look at this bird right here and just your best guess. What is it? That just gives me a feel of where we might stand. And I'll give you maybe a minute or so to think about it. Are you able to vote, or do you see the poll? Oh, I think I may have ended up muting all of you. Let's see.
I do not see a poll.
Oh, no poll?
Same here. No poll that I can find.
Oh, you know why? Because I didn't launch it. There you go. Now you should be able to vote. Okay. It's interesting to watch the votes come in here. And don't worry if you're not sure. In the world of flycatchers, it's a real tough business, and anyone who claims that they can identify every flycatcher, you probably should be very wary of. And of course, the biggest fear that Andy and I have about writing these books is that people would think we would identify every single bird. So but we're the first to admit that there are some birds we will leave unidentified, and some birds that we occasionally ourselves may misidentify. Okay, well, I guess a few are still coming in. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. We didn't get everyone yet, and I'm going to share the results. Can you see the results there?
Yes, we can see him, Cin-Ty.
Okay. Okay, and I'm not going to tell you the identity of this bird yet. But you can see here we have quite a range of um, identifications, Acadian being the one that's most popular, but least willow, yellow-bellied, eastern wood pewee. And I should start off saying that this workshop is just focused on flycatchers or eastern flycatchers in Texas. I'm not worrying about vagrants in our area because that's a whole different thing. So that's why I only asked you to choose from this group. These are the eastern birds that we're going to focus on today. Okay, so let me just do another one. Let's see here. Let's do this one. Take a moment to look at that. And I'll do another poll. Oops. Okay. So I'm just curious what happens with this bird. Both of these were photographed in Texas. And I'll make a note here. This one was photographed in April. Okay. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And you should be able to see, looks like most people are guessing eastern wood pewee, but a little bit of every flycatcher is represented here. And the reason why I do this is, do not be embarrassed if you aren't sure of what it is or if you think you got it wrong. And this is just to illustrate actually how difficult flycatcher identification is, even with our book actually. So let me go to what, let me show you this. This one, I've taken a bunch of flycatchers here and taken out all the color. And I did so because I wanted to really de-emphasize color in identification. And that previous photo there is quite yellow, but that's from leaf shine. And in most cases, in good lighting conditions, the bird that we just voted on would not look as green or yellow as I had shown. And so flycatchers, the problem with flycatchers, they're always dull. They're brown, dull green or olive, gray, and under different lighting conditions, they can seem to change color just like a chameleon. 10 seconds later, the bird becomes greenish in your eyes, and two people standing next to each other might also see it differently. Color is really something you perceive, as well as the source of light. So one person's dull green might be someone's dull brown. So I tend not to focus on color. It can really get you into trouble. But hopefully you can see from here that maybe there are some differences. Well, the things that
Cin-Ty,
yeah.
excuse me, can you move your poll? We can't see the photographs.
Oh, the poll. Oh, sorry. No wonder. Yeah,
You can just close it
No,
too.
no, it's done now. Now you should be able to see it. Can you see everything?
Yes.
I mean, yes.
Okay, there shouldn't be any more
I see three images in a row.
Yeah, okay. So these three images, just want to show you, we took out the color. And so mainly to kind of get the point across that we generally don't want to focus too much on color, except in the extremes, like yellow-bellied flycatcher, it can be quite green. But the thing is, under certain lighting conditions, anything can appear greenish in color or gray. So if you're new to flycatchers, of course, they all look the same. Flycatchers all have kind of a small bill, long tail, doesn't matter which one you're looking at. They all have wing bars, they all have eye rings or different levels of eye rings. But within the flycatcher world, and we're only going to look at Empids today, we will often look instead at things like the contrast between the chest or throat and the back. We'll go into that in more detail. Strong contrast and low contrast, or look at relative lengths of the tail, like this one has a long tail, this one has a short tail. How strong or the contrasting the wing bars are, very strongly contrasting or bold, popping out here, and barely visible here, or at least same color as the mantle. So what we do with flycatchers is to look at a whole bunch of field marks. Unlike many other birds, you can identify them based on one single field mark. The problem with flycatchers, these field marks are hard to interpret. They overlap and they're a little bit variable. So no single field mark in general is going to be diagnostic. So we have to use what we call a holistic approach and combine many field marks. And first and foremost, we focus on shape and proportions. We don't focus on color, we focus on plumage contrast. Voice is very important if you can get a recording. And recording is essential because, and we're not going to do so much with voice today, but it's essential to get a recording because each person's mnemonic or interpretation of a call can be very different of the same call. Habitat is relatively important. Behavior can be important. And one of the other very important ones that I think here in Texas, we're sort of the epicenter for sorting this out is the seasonal status. And I just want to kind of remind all of us, including myself, that our goal is not to ID every single bird, but really to learn how to look at flycatchers. And by doing that, just become a better birder in general for other species. So I'm going to go through some of the main points that are really specific for Texas flycatchers or Empids and Pewees, but not all. We're just going to touch on the most important features to focus on. So when you see a flycatcher, or take a photograph, often you wonder, well, if you're not photographing, if you're just seeing it out in the field, you might only have a brief moment to observe this flycatcher before, say, it flies away or ducks in. So what do you look at in that short amount of time? And to me, one of the most important things to always gauge is this thing called primary projection. And these are Andes plates, and the wing, the flight feathers are made up of these two parts, the secondaries and the primaries here. And the longest secondaries, or the top three ones, or the innermost secondaries, we call them the tertials. And so this is the secondary stack, the primary stack, and the primaries are the really long feathers, and they stick out beyond the tertials. And if they stick out further, we call that a long primary projection. And if they don't stick out as much, it's a short one. And so the way to gauge that is to measure this distance. It's the relative. You don't need a ruler. You just look at this relative distance and compare it to the length of the longest tertial, which is from here, the lower wing bar to the end of the longest tertial. So you can see here a short one, the primary projection is less than half this length, the tertial length, whereas you get a long primary projection, this projection is as long, maybe even longer for some birds than the tertials. And you can see that here with the photos. Least again, compare this to the length of the tertials. So it's less than half that distance. That's what we call a short one. And then you might call willow a medium one. So it's a little bit about halfway, maybe a little bit more. You do have to be careful when the bird opens its wings, so you have to know where to measure from. So always find that longest tertial. And then you can go to the other extreme, an Acadian, where look how long this is. It's the same distance or the same length of the tertial. It's like a saber. And then wood pewees are the same, even perhaps longer. In this case, it's about the same distance, but in some cases, even longer. So hopefully you can see that. And so I'm going to go through a few of these, and then we'll get into the more interactive soon. And so the first step when you see a flycatcher, and I'm not worried about kingbirds and Myarchus flycatchers, because when you see those, you know that those are what they are, kingbirds and Myarchus. Sorting them out is a different story, but when you get into the realm of Empids and Pewees, the first thing you have to do is make sure whether you're looking at a Pewee or an Empidonax. And we show here all the sided flycatcher, which is actually a Pewee and a western wood or eastern wood Pewee, and then willow flycatcher right here. And you can see this Empid. It's a dull bird, willow in particular, often misidentified as wood pewees and vice versa. But if you're in doubt, always look at this primary projection. Pewees have this very long primary projection compared to most all Empidonaxes, except for the Acadian. I mean, Acadian is still shorter than Pewees. So always look at that, and that'll get you 50% of the way when it comes to identifying all these flycatchers out there. And then the other thing the next thing I will do when I'm looking at a bird out in the field is I will look at the contrast between underparts and upper parts. And by that I mean, look at the color of the throat and the face, or the back, or the chest and the back. You can see here on the least flycatcher, it's whitish, and it's bright compared to the grayer face. And you go to a Hammond's or a Pewee, or yellow-bellied. There's the chest and the throat are almost the same intensity of color as the cheek. Do you see that? So here's two. Look at the difference here. Again, yellow-bellied tends to be greener, but I don't know, depending on your eyes, I do see this as yellow, but in dark light, in the shade where these guys like to be, you may not be able to see color very well, or you're going to be tricked. But what won't trick you is look at the uniform coloration between the chest, the throat, and the mantle and the face. Whereas this one, at least you can see a contrast back and forth. And so in the East, in Texas, this is one of the quickest ways to tell if you've got a least or Acadian as opposed to a yellow-bellied. Yellow-bellieds are only one, other than the Pewees, that does not have or has a very weak contrast between the chest and the upper parts. So even if color is giving you trouble, the relative intensities still hold. After I see that, and that's something you can see often even without binoculars. When a flycatcher darts by, you'll see that color contrast. Once I get my binoculars on the bird, I'll start to look a little bit more closely at, say, the bill. And the bill, there's a lot of overlap in the bill sizes or lengths, but at the extremes, they can be useful at least to rule out some. So you have least with a small bill, and Acadians with a long bill. If I were to flip this bill backwards behind, the tip would reach to the back of the eye, whereas this one wouldn't really reach to the back of the eye. That's a way to look at it, that we like how people use this same feature for separating lesser and greater yellowlegs in terms of bill length. So I look at the bill size. We also look at the lower mandible color, although for most of the Texas birds out here, lower mandible color isn't particularly diagnostic, so I'm not going to talk much about it. And then I will look at other plumage contrast, and that's the wing bars. How bright are the wing bars? And we always compare it to the mantle. So you can take this here, a dusky flycatcher, just barely pops out relative to the mantle, whereas at least or yellow-bellied will pop out relative to the mantle and the ground color of the wings. So here you see the least, look how bright those wing bars compared to the mantle. Acadian, the same thing. We don't have to worry about gray and dusky, at least in this part of Texas in general. Willow doesn't pop out as much. Same with alder, although alder may be popping out a little bit more than willow. So there's an interesting pattern though. If you are interested, trying to find these rare vagrants in the fall or winter, anytime you see a flycatcher in the east that has dull wing bars, you really should pay attention, because all the flycatchers, almost all of them from the west, have dull wing bars. And if you're in California looking for some eastern vagrant, anytime you see somebody with bold wing bars, you should be paying close attention that you have eastern vagrant in the Pacific coast. And I have no idea why that's the case in terms of the contrast being geographically distinguished. The other thing to look at is tail length, relative tail length. So least will have a shorter tail, relatively speaking, compared to pewees and gray flycatcher. We don't have to worry about gray, but willow, alder, yellow-bellied will have a slightly longer tail, although there's some overlap. Another feature is the width of the tail. Often those with short tails tend to have narrow tails that also pinch towards the body, whereas things like willow and alder flycatcher and Acadian, they have wider tails and they tend not to pinch, they're parallel. So looks like this one you can just flick off the tail, and this one that feels more like a stiff tail, more like a board as opposed to like a little stick. So here are some examples. Our least flycatcher, see the relatively short tail, similar to Hammond's relatively short tail out in the west, but you can go to the extreme for a long tail. It might be a gray flycatcher. We don't have to worry too much about flycatchers with very long tails, but we do have to worry about alder and willow, which are somewhere in between. But they often have, as I noted, a wider tail. See how wide this is compared to both the Hammonds and least, which have narrow tails. Again, I would never use that as the only identification mark, but it's a hint that might push you in one direction. And of course, birds can move their tail feathers, so you have to be very careful. When we're taking photographs, we often get instantaneous snapshots, and it may not be fully representative of the average posture of a bird. So take a lot of photos when you do that. And then eye-ring, they all have eye-rings to varying extents. And it's important to go through this to talk about, to come up with a common language. One person's bold is someone's weak eye-ring. And so what you can do is when you take a photo or you look at a bird, you just compare it to Andy's plate here as kind of as a guide. And you take something like an Acadian, it has a distinct eye ring here that is uniform in thickness. It's nice, crisp, and clean. Whereas you get a least, it has a really bold, obvious eye ring, but I call this a messy eye ring because it's wider here and thins out in other parts of the eye, and it's not the same on every bird. And then you go to an alder where we would call that an indistinct eye ring, where you think you see an eye ring, but you're not really sure. Well, that's when we would call that an indistinct eye ring. And wing panel contrast. So we're kind of going down the list of priorities of what to look for. Wing panel contrast can be very powerful. It's not that great for the eastern flycatchers because they all have strong wing panel contrast. And that what wing panel contrast is all these feathers in the secondaries have pale edges. See these white stripes here, but the primaries, some of them may have white edges and some of them don't. So in the case of least, they don't have white edges, whereas in gray and dusky, they have whitish edges. So the gray wing, the secondaries and the primaries both look kind of whitish, whereas here it's got white stripes in the secondaries, and then it's just a solid black in the primaries. And again, almost all eastern flycatchers are really characterized by strong wing panel contrast, and then the western Empids are weak wing panel contrast. You have to be careful of wear and tear and molt. We can talk about that at the end. Let me skip crown shape. That turns out not to be that important, except for a few cases, and we'll come to that in some of the examples. Just a couple more slides before getting to the interactive part. So you have all these plumage and structural features to look at, and all the ones I showed you, it's not all of them, but the ones I showed you were pretty much, if you can master that, you're 90% of the way there. You should also, when you're looking at flycatcher or you see one, really pay attention to the timing of when you see them. And in this book, we lay out where they migrate and these bar charts of when they should arrive. We may have to correct a few of these things, and I'll tell you why in a second. But flycatchers are incredibly loyal to when they arrive, not just on their breeding grounds, on territory, but even in migration. And they're insectivores, at least the Empids are, and those really are controlled by temperature and the seasons very, very well, and when the flowers and everything blooms and the leaves come out. And so they're so loyal to that. And so, for example, yellow-bellied flycatcher down here in Texas, it doesn't come in until probably May. And in the spring, they go up through Texas. They don't bleed over to Louisiana. It's pretty hard to find a yellow-bellied flycatcher in Louisiana in the spring. But in the fall, they're pretty common in Louisiana, so they have a slightly different migratory route. So always pay close attention, study these, or use eBird. You can do that too, of when they arrive. And the reason for that is this, and this is also part of the reason I wanted to do this sort of tune-up for flycatchers now that we're getting into flycatcher season. And so this is yellow-bellied flycatcher records in Texas, and the blue is eBird data that I just pulled down. And you can see they start to come in at the last week of April. But however, there is now enough photographic and audio recording on eBird that Andy and I decided to go to every single yellow-bellied flycatcher photograph and recording in the month of April in eBird and iNaturalist, and we found that every single one of them were misidentified. So there's nowhere in the United States is there a bona fide record of yellow-bellied flycatcher before May 2nd, except for a weirdo in California that wintered and a couple weird ones in Florida that wintered. But otherwise, we have not found any. And that makes you wonder what's going on here. And then what it turns out is when you get to mid-May, actually the eBird and the photographic records agree. And so what's happening is that Acadians are coming in here. Eastern wood pewees are coming in April. Maybe least are actually also very late. But those two birds very likely are being misidentified as yellow-bellieds because we want so badly to see yellow-bellieds. But yellow-bellieds are interesting birds that when you really see a yellow-bellied, there's often no doubt. And so Acadians kind of die out about here, and the yellow-bellies peaking in mid-May. We're not even the peak. In fact, it might be even later than mid-May. And when they show up, they're obvious, and you don't usually misidentify them. But when you're in questioning, it probably means it's not a yellow-bellied flycatcher. So, we probably need more data to sort this out, but I would wager a bet that if anybody in Texas or in the entire United States can produce a photo of a yellow-bellied flycatcher in April for me, I will take them out for beer or something like that, or more, because I really don't believe that we get them, and they're so loyal to when they arrive. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this, and it's not just yellow-bellied, it's willow, it's alder, and we're ground zero for all of this in Texas because that's when they arrive. Yellow-bellied is still in the Yucatan in April, and they haven't even completed their molt by the end of March. So they're happy down there, and they breed so far north, and that's why they're really late migrants. So probably any yellow-bellied flycatcher before May 2nd should set off. All the eBird reviewers should change their filters to set off a flag. Okay, so that's important. The other one is vocalizations, and I won't get into that for now because that I think requires another workshop. But we do have these frequency time or the spectrograms, and it's really meant, you can't hear it there, but it's meant to help you visualize a call. And it's important to kind of study that because one person's whit is another person's pip. And the difference is whits are these rising short calls, and pips are sort of more hollow metallic type calls. And then there's slurs, and then there are burrs. And use your Merlin to practice on that and make sure you know what is a whit and what is a pip. And some of these flycatchers both give whits, and very, very difficult, even for Merlin, to separate. Willow and least Merlin has trouble separating their whits, for example. So I have this. This is when you are struck with a flycatcher and you don't even know where to start, or that you have some idea of what it might be. Well, this map really is there just to show you what you're most likely having to contend with. So say you think you have a alder or a willow. Well, then you look at who's closest to you in here that you probably have to worry about least for alder, or a wood pewee for willow, and maybe an Acadian flycatcher, and generally not these birds right here. And so that's just to help you kind of narrow down the birds you have to sort out. Okay, so maybe what I'm going to do now is be a little bit more interactive. I lay out 3 flycatchers here, and I'm not going to do a poll here, but I would say let's kind of walk through these. There are 3 different species, and take some time to look at them. And while you're doing that, I'll kind of start just talk a little bit in the background. But remember, what I do is the 2 things I look at first are the primary extension and the contrast between the upper parts and the underparts. So if you're following along, you take this bird right here. Is that a short or long primary projection? So compare this distance. Actually, I think I can draw. Let's do that. Oh no, no, I can't draw. Hold on. Oh, here we go. I can do that. Can you see if I draw? You see red lines?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the prime projection, and compare it to this. So look how this distance is very short compared to the length of the tertials. So that's a short prime projection. And here, maybe I'll take a look at this one. I'll draw that and here, or here and here and here. Right, this one would be, I would call a long primary projection, and this one be a short on the left. And this one in the middle is somewhere in between. Then I'll look at underpart, upper part coloration. Check there, check there. It's white on the throat and white is, or very light on the belly here compared to the mantle. Do you see here? and defacing these flycatchers, unfortunately. And then look at this one. The throat and the mantle are the same intensity of color. So that would be a weak contrast. Bill, this guy has a long bill. This one has a short bill. And the one in the middle is somewhere maybe short, maybe, but not long, maybe medium. It's okay to be unsure, but you know that's not a long bill. They all have eye rings, although the one on the right has a very nice crisp eye ring, right? Complete. And the one on the left has a really bold one, but it bulges in the rear and maybe thinner at the front of the eye. That's a messy eye ring. Okay. So that's least on the left, yellow-bellied in the middle, and Acadian on the right. And you'll see that I didn't really worry about that the yellow-bellied was yellow. And you can make your judgment yourself that some of you will probably think that's a yellowish looking bird, but maybe not all of you. Its color is really in the beholder of the eye often. And you know, in this case, the bird is even in the shade, the chest is in the shade, so it makes it even more complicated. Here's another one, another set. And these two in the left are in kind of low light conditions, and the one on the right is, you know, in full sunlight. And what do I do? The first thing I will do is look at primary projections, and then I'll look at contrasts and bill size, wing bar contrast. So look at that. That's a long primary projection. This one you can't see too well. There it is. That's a super long primary projection. This one is long, but not as long as the other ones, as the one on the left and the one on the right, right? Hopefully you can see that. So they all have sort of longish bills. The one in the middle has very strong wing bars, very strong contrast between the cheeks and the undersides, right? Whereas this one, this doesn't have much contrast there. The one on the right seems to have more contrast, but it has muted wing bars. And the middle guy has very strong wing bars. So these, the middle is an Acadian, and then you have two wood pewees on the left and the right. And I show the eastern wood pewee on the left, it looks very yellow, but that's because it's in the shade and the sunlight is reflecting off the leaves and making this bird look greener or yellower than it really should be, which is what it looks like on the right in normal light conditions. So you can see if you focus too much on color, it's very easy to fall into the trap and call this a yellow-bellied flycatcher. I mean, it is a flycatcher with a yellow belly, but it's not the yellow-bellied flycatcher. And here's some more, and then I'll start to show some of the photos that you guys have provided. Here's some more flycatchers. Again, I'm looking at primary projections. Let's do that. This is how you should always do it. And of course, in the field, you don't have a pen, but you can visualize doing it like I'm doing it. And you can see, look how short that primary projection is, right? And this one, it's maybe you could call that short. It's not as short as the one on the left, but it's not particularly long. So maybe that's between short and medium. It's okay to waffle a little bit there, but you know that's not a long primary projection. And then here, this one, well, that looks like it's on the shorter end. And what else? I'll look at the underpart contrast. So take this guy, that's dark, and well, you can't really see much of it on this bird, right? Because of its posture, but you can see just a little bit here that that's white, and then a gray face, gray mantle. You do have to be careful if the bird is backlit. They can show a fringe of white feathers there when it's backlit. And then here, this is a good example that this white that you see here is from backlighting. But look at this and compare here. Although a little bit lighter, it is still fairly dark, but not as dark as the mantle, but certainly not very bright. And here, well, you can't see it well, it's in the shade. So sometimes you can do all of the study you want and the bird just doesn't cooperate and give you the full view of it. But you'll see that this wing bar, check out this wing bar, is the same color as the mantle. Whereas these two, the wing bar
See
is
your
brighter.
point. Oh, now I see it. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I wonder maybe there's a delay in when the pen comes in. And here, this wing bar, very bright compared to the mantle. Okay. The one on the left and the middle both have eye rings. But the one on the right, if you look at that, you can say, well, I'm not sure it has an eye ring. Maybe, maybe not. So this would be an indistinct eye ring. Okay. Tail length, relatively short. Hard to know. I mean, this one may be medium. It's a little hard to tell. But this is a least on the left. This is a yellow-bellied in the middle. And then the right one is a willow or alder flycatcher. What if those who want to get real torture, they can stay till the very end and we can talk about willow and alder. But for now, I'm not going to worry about separating willow and alder. Okay, so let's do the we'll go through a few photos. And this one Sarah sent me, Sarah Flournoy, photographed today at Dos Vacas Muertas. Let me see here. Sarah, do you want to say anything about it? I don't know if Sarah's on.
Oh gosh, now I'm going to be embarrassed. Hey everyone. My husband Don Verser took this photo and we just thought it'd be fun to submit it for today.
Okay, perfect. And at Dos Vacas Muertas, well, maybe you can tell us about the habitat that it was in, the sort of microhabitat. Was it out in the open or was it?
It was perched on the edge of the salt cedar where, and then it was open where the road was. So it was right on the edge.
Okay. Let me see. I'm trying to, why don't, if anyone wants to chime in here, and I know nobody wants to be embarrassed, but it's okay. You don't have to chime in with the name of the bird. You can chime in with what features you see or don't see. What about let's I'm trying to find out where I can't really see this. Oh, that's what I'm looking for. I would do, let's do another poll just to see. Okay, so I have this poll going. If you don't want to vote, that's totally okay. And I didn't, normally we would go through each species and talk about how you identify all of them. And I decided not to do that here. So if you're new to flycatchers, that of course may be tougher. But what I really wanted here was to focus on how to look at these, what to pay attention to. So this bird, you can't see the wingtips, right? So prime projection is useless in general for this posture. But what about the
Cin-Ty, what about the tail on this one? Like it shows up almost as three
Yeah,
There's right. So
Yeah.
how do you use it, or do you just remove
Well-
that from your decision?
well, well, this is the challenge of flycatchers. I mean, they can fan their tail briefly, or their one feather could be a little bit in disarray, just like if you don't comb your hair in the morning, it sticks out. So this is the outer tail feather, and that sticks out. So really, the tail is this right here.
These two, okay.
Yeah. There's 12 feathers. They're all stacked up together, hidden there. Yeah, so this one, because of the angle, it's very hard to say if that's a short tail or long tail. So probably not useful. And this is a good one. I like taking the photos that people send to us because it just illustrates this is what you're really facing in the field as opposed to perfectly ideal profile shot. And this sometimes is all you get to see. And so I can't really use tail proportions or primary projection. That's not working for me. But so what can I see? What about the chest and the face?
Strong.
Yeah, that's strong. There's no question about that. That's super strong. And when we talk about Empids, the strong ones, really it's least or Acadian that we have to worry about. And then you have wing bars. Those strong,
again. Yeah.
they're bold compared to the mantle and the ground wings. They really pop out. What about the eye ring? And if anyone can feel free to chime in here, but yeah, but does it have an eye ring? And if so, is it a bold, messy one or a crisp one?
A crisp one.
Looks crisp.
Crisp.
to me.
Complete.
Complete, uniform thickness. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't call this messy. This looks like someone took a nice fine pen and drew a nice, beautiful white circle around it, the eye. And the bill would be on the long side for Empids. Okay, so here I'm going to share the results. And again, this is not meant to embarrass anybody. Can you see the results?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So looks like most people got Acadian. But you can see at least Flycatcher was also a contender, and that's because probably those who thought it might be least, it actually is similar to least. It has a whiter chest, that strong contrast, and it has an eye ring, right? But hopefully after that little discussion, you can see why it's Acadian. Now, yellow-bellied, it looks very yellowish in color here, but yellow-bellied you would not see any contrast between these two parts right here or here, and we'll show some later. Another feature we didn't talk about was Acadians have a very shallow forehead, and that's like 80% of Acadians, and most other flycatchers just never get that. And by that I mean this angle. It's a shallow sloping forehead that peaks at the back, but it's very shallow.
Cin-Ty, can you close the poll? We can't see that.
So, yeah, stop sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So this a shallow forehead angle, a very shallow slope. That's usually the slope of the forehead is not very diagnostic for most of the flycatchers, but for Acadian it is. When I see a shallow sloping forehead, it's a good sign you might have a Acadian. Okay, hopefully that was useful. That was Sarah's from today, actually. And the Acadians, although they come early, they actually a lot come quite late. Oh, here's Letha's. I think Letha's here. Did you want to? I don't remember where this was photographed, but is Letha on?
Hi. Yeah, this was mid-May, Buffalo Bayou. And this bird was singing, so I have a lot of audio recording.
Okay. Yeah, if you have audio, that is often will trump everything. So this will be interesting because I don't have
I can't remember either last year or the year before. I think I put it, you can see it on the photo stamp.
Yeah, I saw it on the photo, though
Yeah.
I can't remember, but this one, I guess, yeah, let's do this. Let's put a poll, just out of curiosity. Again, this is actually a tough one, in my opinion. It's a tough one. Oh, can you see the bird when I have this poll up?
As long as I'm unmuted, I'll just point out that if you grab the pole with your mice, people, that you can move it wherever you want it on your
Oh,
screen.
that's right. Yeah, move the poll to the side.
And as soon as you're done, you can close it too.
That's right. You can close it. Yeah, this is a really educational one. And I think you're going to see that come out in the poll. Okay, that's probably good. We got oh, a lot of people voting in now. All right, that's probably good. We got 75 returns on that. So if I share the results, this is interesting, right? It's not as clear cut. Least flycatcher, a lot are suggesting that. Some are suggesting yellow-bellied and then willow and alder, right? So, let me stop sharing that. So let's look at this. Upper part primary projection. Let's do that first again. There and there. And that I would consider a short primary projection, this distance versus this distance. Very bold wing bars, right? Bold eye-ring. This is of the same bird. These are the same bird, but bold, and is that a messy or a crisp eye-ring?
Messy.
Yeah, that's a messy eye-ring. And what about upper part, underpart contrast? Strong, medium, weak, not sure.
Somewhat weak.
Weak.
Weak. Okay. It's like going to the optometrist, or at least for me, they always say, is this one better or
One
the
or
next
two.
one better? One or two. And I say, well, I can't tell sometimes, but yeah, so this is a funny one because, yeah, if I compare here to here, that's weak. If I compare here to here, maybe that's strong. And this bird in the right picture, it actually looks a little bit stronger contrast than the one on the left, but it's the same individual, just illustrating how these birds can seem to change a little bit based on lighting conditions or even the exposure on the camera, who knows, right? So what were the, okay. I think you can rule out, let's go with what you can rule out first. So sometimes it's not a Pewee. The Pewee would have a primary extension that would be at least this long, right? That would be a Pewee. So we can get rid of Pewee. We're done with that. The other one is what was the other? Oh, Trail's Flycatcher or willow alder. Well, they typically will not have such bold wing bars, not so white. Maybe alder can be slightly bold, but never really this white. And the other thing is they won't have a bold, messy eye ring I mean, this is a really thick edge to the eye ring there. So we can rule out willow and alder just on some of those features. So you're basically left with yellow-bellied and least. Am I missing? And Acadian. Okay, but Acadian also has a long primary projection, so we can get rid of that. So it's yellow-bellied and least. And this is where it gets hard because it doesn't really look that yellow. So I think some of you will say, oh, it must be a least flycatcher. And it turns out this bird is a least flycatcher. But I don't identify it by the fact that it's not yellow. We can have very dull yellow-bellied flycatchers that look just like this. The underpart upper part contrast is one of a funny one. It's some of you said weak. I kind of thought it was medium and in some parts strong. This is a case where a good example where an individual field mark is somewhat variable, that a least flycatcher can have some duskiness on it. When was this photographed, Letha?
I can't remember whether this one I think was the 17th of May.
Oh, May. Okay. So
It's
what's
just
going?
May, yeah, and it's interesting because I had this down as yellow-bellied.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm gonna have to go back and listen to the audio again. But it does have a very messy eye ring, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yellow-bellied.
Throat looks dark to me, so that is part of where I think I've gone wrong on this bird. That
Yeah.
but-
So no, it's very
And
easy
I-
to. It's a tough. As you saw, it's really tough. This one, I think it's a tough ID. But
well,
that.
I'm gonna have to go back and pull out the audio and send it to you.
Yeah. Please
And
send
see
it to
if
me.
that's see what I was thinking at the time, because
Okay.
I may have been thinking the wrong thing.
But the bold eye ring, that eye ring is so bold and messy and elongated at the rear that in itself it's really a white eye ring as opposed to a yellow eye ring alone probably rules out yellow-bellied. Now this bird, by the way, is a first-year bird. It's coming into the end of its first year, so it was born last. If you photographed it in you photographed in May, it was born the year before, and the reason why I can tell is the primary wing panel is quite dull and worn, and that may be partly why this guy has some duskiness to the chest. These first-year birds can look more dusky and not fit your typical textbook least. But if you don't focus in this case on the contrast as much, everything else checks as least. That being said, it has a whitish throat, and you just won't see yellow-bellieds having that. But that's a very educational one. In fact, a lot of these are very educational. Here's another one. Let's take a look at this one. Hopefully this one is a little bit easier to. I'm going to go back and forth between hard and easy so you don't get discouraged. Take a look at that, and let's go ahead and do a poll. How about that? And remember, I always look at the primary projection first, or it's one of the first things that I'll look at, and then I'll look at the upper part, underpart contrast, and then I go from there. Okay. The votes are still coming in, but I'll just end the poll here because I think we have enough to know what the. Okay, so this is interesting. So the bird is an eastern wood pewee. but you'll see nobody picked yellow-bellied and least. So, and that means you, to me, that you are queuing into the right things. This bird, the Pewee, really is the things that you could confuse it with are Acadian and willow alder, because Acadian, here is this, that very long prime projection. The Acadian can have a long prime projection, though not usually as long as what I see here, but it can approach that. So that means you were queuing in on the prime projection, which is good. That's great. But then we look at the upper part, underpart color there, here, 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 and here. But be careful here. The sun is shining here very strongly, so you gotta compensate for that. And this is in the shade, so you gotta compensate for that. But I see the sides of the chest here, they're dark, similar to the face or the mantle or the nape. So that, oh, let me stop sharing this. That should rule out Acadian. Not to mention that you don't see any eye ring, or if there is, it's very indistinct eye ring. So we can eliminate Acadian flycatcher here. We could also eliminate it by the wing bars are not that strong. So you're left with wood pewee and willow or alder. And actually, willow and alder, that's a tough ID too. Sometimes it can go both ways. And I've myself made misidentifications, you know, with a quick second look, I saw a pewee go by, oh, that's a willow, or the other way around until you look more closely. So one, the willow tends not to have such a long bill unless you're out in Southern California or Arizona, they have longer bills. So this has a long bill, and the willow does not have such long primary projection. The willow would be more like here, right? That would be a willow. So hope that helps. Okay, so this, the other thing, by the way, is I put the date here, this is 18th of April, and willow flycatchers, least flycatchers, yellow-bellies, they're not going to be here on the 18th. Even least flycatchers at the very end of April when they come in, except for the occasional lingerer that winters. So when you're looking at mid-April, you really only have two contenders, Acadian and Eastern wood pewee. And then you can use the features that I mentioned how to separate the two. That's not to say that there are never any exceptions. There's occasional exception, and after you master this, then of course it's time to look for exceptions. Okay, here's another one. Try this one. I'll do another poll. It's kind of curious what these polls are very educational for me too, because I get a feel for where confusions may lie, and that helps me me and Andy improve, you know, how we communicate these features. So I really appreciate all of you participating here.
So what are the ones with the high contrast?
Which excuse me, what are the ones with the high contrast? Oh, between upper and underparts? Well, they would be Acadian, least, and willow alders can be variable, can be a medium contrast to maybe strong in some cases. Okay, I'm going to end the poll here, share the results, and looks like folks are going towards willow alder, but you know, Acadian at least are contenders. It's great nobody suggested eastern wood pewee because now you're queuing in on this, right? That's the first step. Rule out the pewee if you can. And so we ruled out. Nobody voted for pewee. I mean, that's great. And then yellow-bellied. Well, the yellow-bellied. This very the contrast here is too strong between here and here to be a yellow-bellied. But now Acadian least and willow alder. That's a tougher breakdown. But you know, if you can get it down to 3 species or 2 species, you're already getting close to understanding all of this. So this one, by the way, the eye ring, it's a tough one. It's quite thin, maybe indistinct. Definitely would not call this a bold eye ring. It might be crisp, but it's quite thin. At least in general would have a much bolder, messier eye ring. So I think we can probably eliminate least based on that, based on the fact that the bill is kind of long there. And also the wing bar, see this? Compare that to the mantle. Oh, let me stop sharing here. Is kind of a dull upper wing bar, almost like a pewee, right? And if you didn't hone in on the primaries, you might call this a pewee because it has dull wing bars. I've certainly made that mistake, and I still can make that mistake if I don't get a look at the wingtips. But that should rule out also Acadian, except for a juvenile Acadian. What else? Acadian tends to be a little bit greener in color, although again we don't use color all the time. But the muted wing bars, in combination with the very indistinct eye ring, can probably help you eliminate Acadian, and least is you don't have to worry about here too because of the size of the bill. So that is a willow flycatcher. This was actually photographed on breeding grounds up north, though, not in Texas. Oh, well, I gave you the answer here. These are least flycatchers to show you. See that bold eye ring, messy, bold wing bars. Look at the face is dark compared to the throat and the chest and the sides. This one's interesting on the left, that it looks quite yellow down here. Could be easily mistaken for a yellow-bellied flycatcher, but look at, you really, again, don't focus on the color, but focus on the intensity, the color here and intensity here or here. This is much darker than the chest, the throat, and the belly, despite whether they're white or yellow. Narrow tail, short primary projection, right? So these are all the hallmarks of a least flycatcher, small bill there. Is it becoming easier? Let's see. Let me see if there's anything going on in the chat here. Okay, good. Yeah, I will go. There's some questions. Do wood pewees has brown smudges on the undertail? That's coming from Jane Tillman. Yes, and Empids do not. But I have to admit, sometimes it's hard to see that. You really have to get a good look of the undertail sometimes. And usually, I have to admit, I never focus on that. But yeah, when you get photos and you happen to see the undertail, that can be very diagnostic.
So it's easy to miss it in the field, do you think?
It's very easy. I have to admit, although we do consider that a field mark in the book, I never use it. I never use it. Yeah, I just, because I don't know, my eye just doesn't focus on it, and sometimes a bird can look like it has smudges there, and that's just some worn feathers. So you have to be exposed. Be careful.
Thank you.
Let's see. Okay, so here's another one, and I forgot who. Oh, Richard sent this. Richard Rulander sent this to me. Is Richard here?
I'm here.
Ah, where was this? When was this photographed? Probably in Pine Brook.
Yeah, the Pine Brook wetlands today.
Ah, today. Okay.
That was today, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was in kind of under the old ponds a little bit.
Ah, that's important. Yeah, the habitat
Yeah.
was in the understory, sort of.
He was in the understory, yeah. And he was somewhat actively pumping his tail at parts of the time.
Okay. Okay, perfect. I'm not going to do a poll because I didn't make enough polls and I have to navigate this. So we won't do a poll, but we'll walk through this. Well, not to embarrass you, Richard, but I'm curious what your thought process is or was on this. If you don't feel comfortable, don't worry about it. Or
Oh, I'm okay at being embarrassed.
okay.
My original thought, and I did have some help from somebody, maybe kind of looks like you. My original thought was yellow-bellied. And part of the reason why is because it wasn't just yellow a little bit on the belly like sometimes you see on Acadian, but the yellow went all the way up to the throat. And there wasn't a lot of contrast between the underparts and the upper parts. It was almost impossible to see the wing bars because you can see that those feathers on the flanks are kind of puffed out over top of the wing bars. And it was a little difficult to see primary projection because the wing bars were covered as well. But it had a really narrow tail, and I thought that it was yellow-bellied. Oh, and the eye ring was, kind of medium. So what I did in my wisdom, I said, I'm sending this one to Cin-Ty. And we talked about it, and I remember you coming back telling me that was a tough one because of I guess the posture and the lack of the ability to see the full wing panels. So I don't know if you have the picture or not, but I sent you another one that kind of clinched it for you.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's right. And everything you said is perfect on how to ID this bird. And when Richard sent that, the first set of photos, I actually was not 100% sure because you couldn't see every part of the bird. It was actually like, well, I guess it was this one. You couldn't see
Yes.
every part of the bird. And I also went through the same thought process as Richard, probably a yellow-bellied, but you never want to get too confident. So there's still a slight chance it might be a Acadian, but and then he sent me another photo which I didn't put on, but this is again a good, very educational photo because you never get perfectly. There's a stick in front of the best parts of the bird, for example, or it's got these feathers flaring out there that cover the wing bars, but you can kind of see their bulge right here. But really, the this lack of contrast between here and here, the throat, the chin, the chest, and the face and the mantle, all of that. In the East, you only have one contender. Well, you have either a Pewee, which this is not, right? Because the primary extension is not very long right here. So if you can rule out Pewees, you have only one contender, and that's yellow-bellied flycatcher, regardless of whether it's yellowish or grayish. There was only one reason why when Richard first sent it to me that although I thought yellow-bellied like Richard, I thought I just want to make sure was the bill actually did seem on the long side, and the forehead angle seemed a little shallow. So just a good example of sometimes they have overlapping features. But it has a narrow tail, and Acadian generally will not have a narrow tail. So the two things that Richard said, low contrast here, narrow tail, and then this probably a crisp eye-ring. Those are good for yellow-bellied flycatcher. And it was photographed today, so May 9th. Good time for those to come in, although we do have Acadians coming in right now as well, like Sarah's bird or Don Verser and Sarah's bird today. This is another Richard photo. What about this one? Tell me about this one, Richard. Like, where did you see it?
Well,
let me go back to this. One thing that Richard did say, he mentioned he photographed under the Yaupon, right? And that's I would never use that by itself, but in the understory, yellow-bellieds, they really like, and Acadians both like to be in the understory. Least maybe more on the edge. Of course, there's always exceptions to that. Okay, yeah. Tell us about this bird. Where you saw it and when was it photographed? Is Richard there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I had to push the button. This photo was taken last season, and it was a fall photo.
Okay.
Okay. And of course it gave me consternation, but I I looked at the head, and the head was really flattish to me. But it seemed to be molting tail feathers as well. And if you see that there's a lot of wear on the primaries, and the primaries extension seems relatively short, but I'm not sure how short it was. The birds, color wise, I mean, there doesn't seem to be a ton of contrast between the underparts and the upper parts, but the photo is not all that clear. And I had a real difficult time with this one. I probably still don't know what it is.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I like this one too because it's a tough one. I figured it was in the fall. This is an adult bird, and it is molting its tail, and you see some very worn primaries there. See how they're frayed. I zoomed in on them, very frayed. And so if you get a very worn bird in the fall, that's an adult, because the juveniles or the first years are very fresh. Although we didn't talk so much about it, only the Acadian. What's that?
I didn't think it was Acadian, and then one of the reasons why is because the eye ring, even though it looks pretty crisp,
Yeah.
that the contrast, upper and lower contrast, didn't seem to be enough for Acadian to me. But like I said, I still don't know what it is.
Yeah, so this is a worn bird, but if you look at the bill, that's a long bill. And so you really only have, again, we already can rule out Pewee here, right? Bold wing bars, the primary extension is not long enough, so we can rule out Pewee. So, but that long bill, you can rule out least. So you're really only working with willow or willow alder, Acadian, and maybe yellow-bellied. So let's focus on that. And I would say that is this tail wide or narrow?
It looks pretty wide, and it doesn't look like it's pinched at the base at all. It looks pretty straight on
Yeah.
the sides.
Yeah, I'd agree with you.
And the forehead angle looks really steep.
Steep or that I would call that low. That's very low.
Oh, you think that's low? Okay,
yeah.
well,
That's very-
that's why I'm learning.
Yeah, that's a very low angle.
Okay.
yeah, we're looking at this angle here. So,
Okay.
so wide, I agree with you, that's wide. I would call this a very low angle. It has a crisp eye ring. And then look at this throat and here. Although you're saying you don't think you can, you're not sure about the contrast, it's still lighter. It's also
Medium
white,
or something, maybe medium?
maybe medium. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell because of lighting conditions. So this is a Acadian flycatcher.
You
And
think the primaries are worn to the point that it looks like it's fairly short extension?
it could be. We don't know what's going on here. I have a
Yeah.
question here. Right. So it could be. There's a couple of reasons, and we'll do this for those who really want torture at the end. But the primary tip formula is very diagnostic. I can see that here, and I'll go to that at the end of
You're talking about the gaps.
all the relative spacings of the gaps. But I don't want to
Mhm.
touch on that too much right now. We'll come back to that later. But the other thing is a side note is of all the eastern flycatchers, Acadian is the only one that begins molt on its breeding grounds. So when they come down where we are, we may start to see some of them beginning to molt, but all the other flycatchers will not molt. They molt after they reach their wintering grounds. So
That's pretty diagnostic then, huh?
yeah, they they just begin to molt. Yeah, see this short tail right here. So it's not a complete one. It begins and it completes it down further south. So that's an Acadian. But yeah, check
Wow.
out that flat, I mean, really shallow forehead, and maybe we'll see what's next. Which is this? Oh, this is another Letha one, and that was photographed recently, I think, Letha.
Yeah, this was photographed like less than about a week ago or less, because I think
Okay.
this is what triggered you to perhaps give this talk.
Yeah,
But,
my
one thing that happens I find is that when flycatchers start coming through, they're just like coming through all on top of each other.
that's right.
And so, for example, on that least flycatcher, I think I've got a yellow-bellied file. I'll have to go back and look.
Okay.
In terms of an audio file, maybe there's two birds in the same bush practically. But this was one of those cases. There were a lot of flycatchers going through. And when it first landed, I thought it's a trails flycatcher. And then I looked at the photos when I got, and the reason I thought that, I don't know. But when I got home, I looked at that eye ring on the one that's got its bill open. I thought, oh, no way is that trails because it's got a big eye ring on it.
Yeah.
So that's when I chickened out, and I think I called it Acadian, which is wrong.
Yeah, well,
you can take
this-
it from there, Cin-Ty. I mean, I'm glad.
This was a great example again. When Letha sent this to me, I actually didn't realize at first these were the same bird.
Yeah,
And
that's the same
so-
bird. It just moved its head. You
Yeah,
can see it's on the same bush.
and when I did the same second take, when I looked at the one with the bird with the mouth open, I didn't think Acadian. I actually was thinking, is it a Pewee maybe that just happens to look like it has an eye ring? So you can see how, for those who are just beginning into this, seasoned birders like Letha and me, we wonder sometimes, right? And so it's always good to have multiple photos. And the reason why I thought this one on the right might have potentially been a Pewee was, I was probably looking at it on my iPhone. I thought that the primary extension was long, but of course, now that I look at it, it's not actually very long. And then there's also this weird piece of white glint. Do you see this? Or lint on all of them that is not actually part of the wing. It's some junk. And if you don't look carefully, it makes the wing tips look much longer. And I can see why you might have thought this might be Acadian because of that eye ring. But you know, that's a better photo to focus on. A bird with the mouth open and head twisted can do weird illusions. So but it's a good thing you had this other photo. Otherwise, maybe we would both misidentified this bird. But the primary extension is certainly not long enough for a Pewee, and also not long enough for an Acadian flycatcher. Although it's kind of white, I would say this is a weak or moderate contrast. I'm looking at the sides right here. Wing bars are not strongly popping out. The upper one, see this? Compare this wing bar to here, that color. And that should rule out Acadian, except for a juvenile Acadian in the summer. But we have this to go with. What else? Indistinct eye ring, right? But this is a good example. The bird is showing more of an eye ring when it twists its head, but I don't know if that's the skin changing, being stretched itself and showing more. You know, it looks like it's even closing its eye. You see that? So, or I don't know what it's doing, winking or so. It can be a little bit tough with just one photo. But this is a willow flycatcher.
And this whole report I struggled with quite a bit, because the very first thing when I walked into this little space, I heard whit, 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 and the whits were just going like crazy. And Merlin was saying willow. And I know with whits, you have to be very, very, very careful, because I've been fooled and it's been a least. But then within 10 minutes, I saw eastern wood pewee for sure, and this bird. And so now I'm thinking those whits probably actually were willow, but don't know for sure. I never saw a least on this day.
Well, Merlin has trouble with the least and willow whits. But yeah, I mean, right now, one of the big problems is flycatcher season. You'll get 3 flycatchers at the same time, species, and in the same place. It can drive one crazy. So it can be very crazy, especially if you're trying to separate willow and alder. In addition, so I will come back to how I know this is an alder. I mean, a willow, not an alder.
Awesome.
Later. But first steps first, let's get it down to willow, alder, or trails flycatcher. So willow.
Right. Thanks for the help on that bird, by the way.
Yeah, no, it was great.
I was shocked when you
educational.
told me it was willow after all.
Yeah, well, sometimes the gut instinct is right. Okay, so this one's from Peter Gosling. I don't know if he's still on here. I think this was photographed somewhere north of more towards Dallas, maybe.
Yes, Dallas.
Okay. Yeah, we can barely hear you, but and apparently it was photographed through a window. And
Yes.
so these are not the greatest.
because
What's that?
it's kind of blurry. Blurry.
Yeah, they're a bit
So-
blurry.
Yeah.
And well, I mean, sometimes that's all we've got to work with. So I put it in again for educational purposes as blurry. And they are of the same bird, I was told.
Right.
So this actually is a really tough one. I mean, we can rule out Pewee. Done with that. We can rule out yellow-bellied. See, very strong contrast. So forget yellow-bellied. What else do we got left? Acadian. Well, look at the primary projection. That's pretty short, so I can rule out Acadian. And so basically I have only least, trails, and what else do I have? Yeah, least and trails. And we got rid of Acadian. So just least and trails. Now the wing bars are so bold in here that I think you can rule out willow flycatcher. So really you end up with only least and alder to contend with right here. And the problem is, although most people would think that when you think about alder, that the one you have to worry about is willow, separating willow and alder. Actually, least and alder in some cases are even more similar than alder is to willow, and it's a really difficult ID. And I guess for this one, maybe I can't be 100% sure, but my sense is this is a least flycatcher and not an alder, as I think what you said was originally identified as. And the reason is it's got a messy eye ring. This one looks a little bit crispier, but it's hard to tell. But this is messy, and the wing bars are so bold. And the other thing is the primary projection is very short, and alder tends to have a slightly longer primary projection. Now the tail is wide, which might hint more at alder or willow, but again, you don't make an ID just based on one feature.
What about the bill though, Cin-Ty? Like that picture on the right, that looks like a long bill for.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That's another thing. The long bill, you might think more alder. There's overlap. I don't know what to say about that. Although I will note this is an adult bird, and it's in August, and adult birds are very worn, and so this looks like it has some stuff going on in its face. So if it has lost some feathers or some feathers are worn, the bill is going to look longer than normal. So
What about the lower mandible color?
Yeah, I mean, alders should be mostly orange, and same with least, so that's not particularly diagnostic. Unfortunately, lower mandible color is not a great one for eastern empids. They're mostly orange. Yeah, I think this is a least, but if you wanted to be conservative, then probably this should be one of those you leave as empid spa, which as much as we don't want to leave something unidentified, we may have to let it go. So I hope that helped, Peter. I don't know if that
Cin-Ty,
yeah.
like this bird, if you look at the top wing bar and the bottom wing bar, it has kind of that weird, it stops on the top. Is that just wear, or is that something that we should be looking for?
What you mean right here?
Right where you drew your right where you drew your red line to look at the length of the primary projection, and
Yeah, here.
there, and then go up to the next red line. Yeah, there. You see how the wing bar just stops on the
You mean
top,
like-
not on the bottom, but on the top.
mean
Does that
this
mean
stuff?
anything?
Right here, that sharp demarcation?
Yes, right there.
No, it doesn't mean too much.
Okay.
There are, it turns out for separating Western flycatcher, Pacific slope, from yellow-bellied, there is some feature in there on the upper parts of that, the demarcation that you're talking about that is quite diagnostic, but I won't talk about Westerns here. But for the Easterns, it's not that important. That being said, it's very sharp, right? And that helps accentuate the boldness of both of the wing bars, and at least really has that feature, and willow and alder, that upper part, that demarcation tends to be a little bit more diffuse.
Cin-Ty,
So-
he may be talking about the gap in the upper wing bar.
Oh, this gap?
The gap, it's dark right there. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just the feather is kind of crooked. I wouldn't worry about that, because that, if you looked at the other side of the bird, it might not be the same, or if you look at it 10 minutes later, it could change that. So that's just, this is a worn bird. It may be missing a feather. I mean, look at the tertials here. They're kind of frayed. This is a worn adult bird.
Cin-Ty, I have a separate question on wear and the eye ring. Is the eye ring consistent from spring to fall, the messy versus clean?
More or less, but you have to, the age of the bird matters, because in the fall, the adults, their eye rings get messier. because they're still their plumage is 1 year old. Whereas the first year, those born in say June, they will be fresher and not have much wear on it. So it could be all eye rings on juvenile fall birds, like in late August, September, they could be a little bit more cleaner. But this is an adult bird, and especially by August 25th. You should see these birds by the time they get down to Mexico. I mean, they don't molt until they get down, so they look like crap. These birds. Actually, if you bird down in southern Mexico, it's tough because a lot of the birds are missing feathers, and some of the features we talk about, you got to be very careful of. So least flycatcher is what I think, but maybe better to leave it as Empid spa. Okay, what do we got here? This is another one of Letha's. This is a hard one because of the angle it was shot at, which causes a lot of foreshortening.
That was in the same field as the least flycatcher that we looked at a little bit. Same day, same field, everything moving around.
And what were you contending with? What species were you thinking of here?
I'm actually thinking it might be an eastern wood pewee. It's like you said, it's foreshortened.
Mm-hmm.
I was considering trails. If you look on that left photo, are those rounded or sharp at the end, or does that matter at the end of the primaries? Sometimes I feel like trails has almost like a tubular shape to the bill, which I don't know if I see here or not, or whether that's just not even a thing.
No, it is a thing. I think you are queuing in on that
So-
the bill here, you see the culmen, the ridge is so straight. First, it's a long bill, and it's so straight, the base and the culmen, and maybe that's what you mean by tubular for trails, and trails would have a slightly more curved culmen. So yeah, I agree. It doesn't look like that, but I can see why trails could have been a contender. The other possible contender could have been Acadian, and that's it, and then Eastern wood pewee. But this is a pewee, and they should have a longer primary extension, but you have a bit of foreshortening that's going on here. But that heavy bill pretty much solidifies that this is a pewee. And there's also something about the primary tip formula, but we can talk about later. Okay, and sometimes this is just, you can't really use like the length of the tail because they're missing a tail. So this is a yellow-bellied flycatcher that I took. But here, look at the mantle, the throat, they're almost the same color, right? And that's the only Empid in the east that has no contrast between upper and lower parts. All right, Doug Fishman. I didn't know if he sent this to me to torture me, but
No, this was a day that Andrew and Richard had already been at Pine Brook at the deck, and actually, with permission, when Lee took these photos, I had broke my lens at Big Bend.
okay.
The week before. But anyway, so yeah, there were two birds, and no, we heard nothing from these birds.
Yeah, I guess I accidentally already revealed what I think, but I forgot to put that hide that. But yeah, sometimes this is all you see, a bird's head or a bird's tail. And fortunately, Doug got another photo over here of the same bird, presumably, but it was very distant. So this is a heavily cropped image, and there's really not much I can do with this bird other than it's either at least willow or alder, I don't think it's a willow. Willows tend to have a little peak to the crown, but this has such a beautiful round crown that it is, once you narrow it down to that group, it's either an alder or a least. And so another Empid spa, I think it's a trails, and if so, it's an alder, but I can't 100% rule out least flycatcher. Okay. So if you were hoping that I was going to be able to identify every single one, I may have disappointed you, but that's the reality. Another one that Doug sent me. Okay. Some you'll have to just leave alone, and some are this is very educational, this one, because they're really distant, heavily cropped photos, but this one is identifiable. I don't know, Doug, if you wanted to say anything more on this bird.
I mean, I don't see much of an eye ring. The wing bar contrast is pretty light, and the tail, the tertiaries seem to go quite low. So
Yeah, and very low, very weak upper part, underpart contrast. So you're left with well, you can rule out probably Acadian and least flycatcher. It does have very long primaries, right? Even though it's blurry. Look at this long wing, and then probably that's the primary extension, right? And it has that posture that's a little distinct from the Empid. So this is a Pewee. Well, I can't tell you if it's an eastern or western wood Pewee, but judging from where it was photographed in Houston, it's probably an eastern wood Pewee. But the other feature, the reason why I decided to show this one, despite that it was so distant, is look at the habitat that it's in. It's on a tall, dead snag, sitting happily there. And we're right in the open. And you rarely will, I mean, almost never see a yellow-bellied be that exposed, an Acadian that exposed. Willow maybe could get that exposed occasionally but they tend to still retire to the edges of bushes. Least will rarely get that exposed unless they're on breeding grounds. So Pewees do this. So if you see a bird way up high, that's got to be a Pewee, almost always a Pewee or other-sided flycatcher. Okay, I think let me take a break for a second. I see the number of people are dropping off. We still have 94 here. Let me see. Let's take a break. Anyone have any questions? Let me look at the chat here. If anyone wants to say anything in the meantime, because we're going to move, it's a natural transition. Now we're going to do something a bit more technical, and the goal is to help you identify willow and alder flycatcher. But if you don't want to get that technical, now is probably a good time to have good dreams about flycatchers, I guess.
Hey, Cin-Ty, I got something
Yeah.
to say.
Yeah.
I went and looked at that photograph that the last one that I submitted to you, that one that had the worn primaries, and that photo was actually taken in May.
In May. Oh,
Yes.
Then it's a juvenile. I mean, not a juvenile. It's a first-year bird
Okay.
that is.
But he was molting on the tail though.
Yeah. So that we're talking about
The Acadian, the one
Acadian.
that you,
Okay.
the one
Right,
that you
so-
believe was Acadian, yeah.
So timing matters, and so that would mean it is a first-year bird from the previous year.
So like a year and a couple months old, or a year, just a little
Well,
over, or a
less
little
than
less
a
than a
year.
year.
It'd be
Less than a year.
like
Okay.
10 months or 11
10
months.
months. Okay.
something like that. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
No. That's good to know. I clicked something where I lost my my screen. Where is my what happened here? Oh, what? I need to get, oh, I see. Back to the speaker view. Did I stop sharing? Oh no, let me stop sharing and start over on this. Yeah, so the juvenile or the first years, they hold on to a lot of the original feathers. Okay, let's see. Can you see that? Birding yoga?
Yes, we see it.
Okay. All right, now I'm back. Or at least I can see where I am. Yeah, worn birds can be tough. Yeah. Any other questions before we go on to some a little bit more hardcore stuff?
I do have one question, if you can hear me well enough.
Yeah.
When we say messy for a least flycatcher's eye ring, what quantifies something as being messy? Does it mean it skips some areas? Does it mean that it kind of juts out in a couple areas?
Yeah. I guess the better way to say what qualifies something as crisp and clean, and that would be that the eye ring is of uniform thickness and complete around the eye. So it doesn't change in the width, and it's all complete around like a nice, clean, beautiful circle. And the margins of that eye ring are sharp, whereas a messy could be any of what you said. It could be an incomplete eye ring, meaning that some parts are thick, some parts are missing, or it could have the edges of the eye ring, although they're bold, they might be diffuse a little, not as sharply demarcated.
Thank you.
Okay, any others? We've gone from I forgot how many we had on here, but 150 to now 70. So you guys must be the diehards here. Any other question before we go into primary tip formulas and willow alder? This is so this stuff is mostly new, and it's not in any books, not even really in our volume 1s and 2. It'll be in volume 3. Okay. Are we ready? You want to do this? All right. Sounds like people want
We're
to
ready. Do it.
All right. Okay. So this is a diagram of a bird's primaries, right? Let me how do I let me put the pointer here. The bird's primaries, and there are 10 primary feathers. And when the bird folds its wing, you can see a lot of the primaries. And it turns out what you see that is we number them from the outside in. The outermost primary is P10. I'm sorry, I'm getting technical on here. But the 10th and the 9th primary you never see because they are short and they're hidden. They're stacked underneath. They're hidden on the folded wing. And so the tip of the primary typically is P8, the 8th one or the 7th one. And the 8th one, if you see it, it's only a tiny bit. It'll only stick out just a little bit as I show here. So typically what you see is P7 and just a little bit of P8 and sometimes not even. It might be the same length of P7, okay? And so what it turns out is that these primary spacings are quite unique between the different species. So what I mean by that is the distance, like P7 to P6, is this distance right here relative to this distance, okay, P6 minus P5, that ratio can be diagnostic. And in fact, the other ones can be too, but this is the easiest one to see. They're the ones that are exposed most often. And so we often look at these differences. So once if you can use all the things that I said about that coming up to this point of this workshop to help yourself narrow down to a subset of MPIDs, then you go and look at the relative spacings of these primary tips that pretty much can usually seal the deal for you. And there's no way you're going to remember this diagram, but this is based on measurements of a lot of specimens of birds. And here we're showing you all the relative lengths of these primary tips and spacings, okay? And I'll go into a couple examples. Let's take Acadian and yellow-bellied here. So this one's yellow-bellied and this one's Acadian. And yellow-bellied, oh sorry, Acadian, if you're looking between the Acadian and yellow-bellied and you're having trouble because you can't tell the primary extensions, maybe you have a foreshortened photograph, the P7-6 is very long compared, or it's longer than the P6, P5. I don't know if you can see that. And then yellow-bellied is the reverse, that the P7-6 is shorter than the 6-5 ratio, okay, or the 6-5 distance. In least, we'll talk about least later. That one can show some complication. And so one thing you might think is you have to count the primaries. You have to know which one's 7, 8, for example. But I don't have time to get into that in great detail. We may have to do another workshop on that. But so first thing is to narrow it down your bird to a couple similar species, and then you can use this. Let me show you some examples here. So here is a bird in May in Galveston from last year, and I've zoomed in on the primaries. And this, oops, let's see. This, whoops, is P7. And P8, you can barely see it, okay? And this one is P6, and this is P5 right here. And you can see that P5, P6, this thing is longer than this, okay? And that, if you're worried about Acadian versus yellow-bellied, and this is a good example because look at this bill, right? This bill is a little bit long, and you might think it's an Acadian because you can't see the underpart, upper part conchas very well, just barely, and you're not sure, right? The eye-ring is could be either Acadian or yellow-bellied. The primary extension in this case is not long, so you might think that you can rule out Acadian, but that bill is so long. There's overlap, so you might go. So this one gave me trouble, but if you look at the primary tip spacing, relative spacings, that seals the deal. If you can narrow it down to Acadian and yellow-bellied. So this is in Acadian, it's the reverse. This part is longer than this part, okay? And I think I have a photo of that. Oh, here's another yellow-belly. Look at this. Check this out. This is P7, P6, P5. Okay. Look at how I probably didn't draw it very well, but this is longer than this part, right? Oh, here. See that? And then this is P8. This is 8, 7, 6, 5. Okay. So there's this wide gap that's in the wing, not at the tip. So the widest gap is within the wing, not at the tip. So I call this within the wing. And that's yellow-bellied for you. And every other feature on this bird checks out for yellow-bellied. This is a first-year bird. And then this one is an Acadian, and it's a weird Acadian because in this case it has a very round head, which could confuse it. They usually have a little bit more of a peak to it. But you know, we're dealing with Acadian, least here, and yellow-bellied right here. Those are things you deal with, although the strong contrast can rule out yellow-bellied. So we have these to contend with. The crisp cling eye ring could probably rule out least. But if you weren't sure, you look at this. I blew up the wings. The P7, P6, this is PH right here. And then here, that P8 barely sticks out. This long P7, P6, compared to P6, P5, considerably long. That is a good sign of Acadian as opposed to yellow-bellied or least, right there. So I don't know if you can see that. And it takes a lot of practice, but these days with the cameras that we have, they're so good at detecting or photographing these things. We can now see them. We couldn't do this, 15 years ago. So when you see a flycatcher, always take a picture, do everything you can to get the picture of the wingtips too, not just the projections, but if you can get a clear enough picture of the wingtips, you usually can seal the deal. And if some of you are banders, you can use the pile handbook and to also try to identify the only issue with the pile handbook, there's all these absolute measurements, and there's like 6 measurements or 7 measurements you have to do. And when you're banding and the bird's screaming and trying to get out of your hand and you're trying to go as fast as you can, and the differences are in the level of millimeters, you make a lot of mistakes, and it's very hard to identify. In fact, it's harder to identify flycatchers in banding than it is from photographs and in the field. So the right way to do it, if you're banding now, is you take a picture with your iPhone of the bird's wing, or the whole thing, but you got to get the wing like this. Take that picture and keep it stored, and then you will have the ID, and we'll have this stuff. We have some of it published, others will be published soon. That way you don't disturb the bird, and it's quite accurate. So here's Acadian, another Acadian. Look at this. This is P8. This is 7, 6, 5. Look how long that is compared to 6, 5, right? So that's Acadian, and it's significantly longer. So you don't even have to measure anything. You just have to look at a lot of these, and you can get a good feel for that. All other features on this bird check out for Acadian. Wide tail. And compare that to a least flycatcher. Whoops. Right, they're more equal there. It's a little bit longer, but not as long as what you get for an Acadian. That's a messy eye ring. It flares out here. You've got some here, but nothing here. So bold wing bars, short primary extension, and then you've got the beautiful primary tip formula laying out. Here's another least flycatcher. See how this least, and turns out 7, 6, number 5 doesn't even stick out sometimes beyond the tertials. Okay, so any questions on that? Or this is too crazy, too much?
Not crazy at all.
Okay, we have an article on this that I have people's emails, so I'll send them to you so you can study that. But I think what the holy grail is that you probably want to see is because all these other flycatchers, you can make the ID based on other features, is really willow and alder, right? Particularly silent ones. Sometimes they don't call, or you just have a photograph, or sometimes there's so many flycatchers and you can't tell who's calling, right? And but this is the distance of the there we go. P7, P6, P6, P5 gaps, right? And basically we're showing here that willow and alder are very different here. You can do a histogram, and that ratio turns out to roughly fall at the 1-to-1 or halfway point, which is to say, if you first you got to get it down to trails. Once you got it down to trails, look at the wingtips very, very carefully. And in willow, the this P6, P5 is the long one, and in alder, it's the P7, P6, P7. Sorry, 7-6 is the long one. And 95% of the birds can be separated this way. So I don't know if you can see that. The human eye is very good at seeing subtle differences. So this guy is just a little bit longer than this, and here this one is a little bit longer than this. Okay. And I'll send this out. This kind of is a chart. If you take a photo of a bird, you got all of that. Beautiful. You can take out a ruler. You don't have to have absolute. Doesn't matter what the scale is, as long as you keep the same scale. Just measure those different spacings, and you can just see where you fall on here. And this, what we call the 6-7 ratio, is really the most diagnostic one, but you can add on these other ones as well. And so if you don't believe that you can see this, let me show you right here. See this difference? And here you can see that the widest gap is 7-6 there, and the widest gap is 6-5 right here. Whoops. And so this right here is an alder, and this is a willow. Okay. And your eyes should be able to see if it's deviates from the halfway point, which is really the demarcation between willow and alder. And here's some more. Blown up. This, I don't know if, yeah, this is willow. See this? This is the long one. And over here, this is the long one. It's subtle. Whoops. It's subtle, but it's there. See that? And other features, check out for willow and alder, right? Willow tends to have weaker wing bars than alder. Willow tends to have a less distinct eye ring than alder. Alder will actually have a thin eye ring. Willow's bill tends to be a little thinner and straighter than alder, which is a little bit more conical or tubular, as Letha noted. What else? Alder tends to have stronger contrast between upper and lower parts, and willow tends to be less contrast, where it gradually diffuses in here. And so all of those, even from plumage alone, I probably already would have identified this as a willow, but you want to be careful because, as you know, for trails flycatchers, so you want to get the call. But if you can get this wingtip, that and in combination with all those other features, you can identify silent trails flycatchers.
Cin-Ty, can you comment on distinct? If you look at those two pictures, there's more of an even regular eye ring on the willow and kind of a more wider in some sections for alder. So I'm kind of wondering on definition.
Yeah, it's a tough one actually to describe. I mean, I can see how this, like how this is, there's a eye ring. I guess Andy and I are still struggling of how, because we see it, but how do we communicate that? And I guess for me, the willow, so the alder face tends to be a little darker. It's a darker bird, and willow a little paler bird. So the eye ring actually stands out a little more anyway on the alder just because of the contrast. And willow, the face is not as dark, it's a little paler, so the eye ring doesn't stand out as much. That's partly how I see it, but it's a little hard to, because alders can sometimes have a complete crisp eye ring, but it tends to be very thin. But it's because it has a dark face, it'll stick out more. Willow can have a fuzzy eye ring like this, but because the face is a little duller, it doesn't stand out. But it usually is either non-existent or it doesn't. It's not as strong as it never approaches least flycatcher.
Cin-Ty, does that white area, like between the bill and the eye on that alder, does it have any significance in ID?
Well, I don't know. We looked at that a lot for all flycatchers actually, and sometimes I thought I felt that I could see that there were some differences, but then every time I played with it, 30-40% of the time I was wrong. So we never really talk about that in our books, and so I don't know if it's very reliable.
Okay.
There's so much
Thanks.
variability. Yeah, on the lures. So I really, we haven't seen that, or at least Andy and I never really used that. And then here, if you have a banded bird, this is one of the ways to take a picture. The worst way to get a picture of an empid, of a banded empid, is on its back, you holding the bird on its back with it facing you. And that's commonly the way I get photos from banders, because that's how you hold the bird often. It's a very natural way to hold the bird, but from that angle, it's usually a useless photo. You need to get the wings here. And so this is from Dan Baldessari. He was banding both of these species out in New York City, in upper New York state. But and you can see the differences here with the alder, that being the longest, and that it's subtle, but it's definitely visible. It just takes a little practice. So I think that's it. I ended. There's in the interest of time, I won't get into it. One does have to be careful of least, and I can send the paper to you, which explains why you have to be careful, but that can be for another day. So that's all. Hope that was a good tune-up for the spring, and the peak of flycatcher migration probably hasn't even hit. We have another week before I think the peak really hits. So and with that, any questions?
Cin-Ty, I sent you a photograph which you had in there. You skipped over it right before the description of the wing, which was the quiz bird for. I'd be curious to have you talk through that.
Yeah, which one did I?
Keep going. You skipped over it right when you took the break.
Oh, that's why I was wondering, because I thought I had put it in. Oh, this. Yeah. All right. These are two different birds, right?
I don't know.
Okay.
I can't say for sure.
All right. Well, these are tough, and maybe I'll start with the easiest one first, which is all relative. The one on the right, I I I think it's a willow alder flycatcher. I think the only other thing you could confuse it with is maybe a least. I think the bill is a bit long for least, but I don't know if something's covering it up there. The tail looks kind of wide. The primary extension is maybe on the short side for willow alder, but within range possibly. And there may be some foreshortening going on here. The eye ring is not very bold, and it's got a kind of a pale face. Of course, least can have that too. And it's also got this sort of longer look to it. That's why I suspect it's a trails. I don't know what your thoughts were, Ron.
Yeah, well, I was struggling between least and trails. When I saw it in the field, I thought it was a trails. When I started looking at some of the marks, I wasn't sure, but the wide tail just looks, I mean, it looks really wide. And that's the way it looked the time I saw it, the entire time I saw it.
Yeah, and also well, I guess there was the question, maybe that was from Robert Opperman, that of the wing bar. So you see on willow or on these that you have the wing bar, but there's a little tail, like the edge bleeds upwards here, there, so it makes it more diffuse top, and so you know, this is an adult bird. It's in fresh plumage. They molt in the late fall or in the winter. So this is all in fresh plumage. So this is not an issue of wear. And I think least will have a bolder, stronger demarcation in this area than have these little teeth come up. So
What about that angle on the right? I mean, it looks
which
very,
angle?
very large. The angle from the bill to the head is like way, way flat, like almost like
Oh,
be an Acadian, right?
yeah. You know, I know I know Richard's confusion when we disagreed on whether that was a low or high angle. Actually, this is important. Yeah, so it's when I meant low, I think it was this.
Yeah, that area. Yeah,
this angle, not
exactly.
this angle. So it's a very shallow sloping forehead. Maybe Richard was thinking there, but yeah, and that's also that's also consistent with willow. You know, least will tend to have a crown like this, like that, and
Yeah, rounder.
willow may be more like this, right? Almost peewee like. So
if it's the same bird, since you look at the left picture, to me, that bill is way too long for a least.
yeah. That one's way too long for sure. Yeah. You know, I don't know if it's the same bird, but I would not call this the one on the left. Yeah, that bill's too big for a least. It's not an Acadian. The prime projection is too short for
Right.
that. What else? It's not a yellow-bellied, right? Not a pewee. What else do we need to rule out? We ruled them all out. So it's a trails. And I don't know.
They were in the same area and taken about the same time, but obviously the bird changed position and the lighting changed a lot. But I don't know if it's exactly the same bird. I suspect it is, but I'm not 100% certain.
Yeah, so I would say, and then I wrote all over this bird, unfortunately, right here, so you can't see, but based on what I can see on the bird on the right, on those primary tips, it looks like a willow. So, and also that would rule out alder. Rule out least flycatcher here, the way that is. The one on the left is just too blurry. I can't really tell. So I think it's a trails, but would have to leave it at that as trails, the left one. If you're sure it's the same bird, then
I'm
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to leave this way because the crown shape looks different. It could also be an alder. It's very hard to tell on this bird, but if it's the same bird, it's amazing how, being in the sun and being in the shade, how the color changes, right?
Yeah, but like I say, I don't know. I mean, there were obviously a number of Empids around, and this was in the same area, but that's all I can say.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be comfortable with the right one as willow, but the left one trails.
Well, it went in my checklist as both trails until I started looking at the pictures.
Okay. Yeah, often for those who've seen a lot, that experience, when you see the whole gestalt in the field, the bird actually moving around, that carries a lot of weight sometimes. And then when you look at the photo, you froze it, and then you start to second guess yourself. But which is, you should always second guess yourself, but sometimes your first instincts were close. All right. Well, I mean, any other questions? We come down to 43 of the diehards here. Anything else? We have, yeah. Oh, Cloris. Oh, someone asked molting birds. I don't think molts you have to worry about in the United States. You have to worry about it in Central America or Mexico. And
Cin-Ty?
there yeah.
Somebody a while back asked about if there are any gender differences in Empids. Male versus female. Is there anything you can tell?
There certainly are in body size and absolute measurements, but we didn't notice any obvious differences in sort of relative features.
Are there any size differences between Empids that are diagnostic or no?
I don't think so. I mean, they are. Well, yes, there are, but whether you can discern that in the field, and you certainly can't discern it in photos. I don't think it's possible. So if you actually did measure, if you had the bird in hand and you measured it, yeah, there are differences. Hammond's is small, Least is small, Yellow-bellied is small, Acadian is a bigger bird, but that's very difficult to evaluate in the field. Certainly, I don't think I can. What you are evaluating is proportions. You might think this is a slimmer bird or a stocky bird, or Pewees. They are significantly bigger, so you can get that feel. And yeah, willow or trails are on the bigger side of the Empids. Alder will have a longer wing than willow in absolute terms, but it's always tough to judge those in the field.
I'm the person that actually asked about the molt and during migration, and it was mostly based on the picture that you had of the Acadian earlier, that you said that sometimes you couldn't use the wingtip projections to get molt.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So for projections, you do. So I take back a little bit what I said. I thought one was focused on the primary tip relative differences, but
well, I was, but you're not going to be able to get to the primary tip differences as if you've worn off the tips of the primaries.
Yeah. You have to be very careful. So first look if it's worn. So where you have trouble is I'll tell you the places where you have trouble is adult birds in summer or fall or early fall. They didn't molt, and that's why they're worn, and the tips can be frayed, and that makes it very hard to identify where the tip ends. So in some cases you can't do it, and where they get most worn typically is by October or November and down in the tropics. And those, yeah, they're gone. You can't see them. And then when they molt and start to replace feathers, you obviously can't do that. And that happens primarily for most of the flycatchers, not all, but most of them on the wintering grounds, so in Mexico or further south. So you can't use that there. But we don't typically have to worry about the molt thing for most of the flycatchers because they finish their molt down there and then they come up here. We just have to worry about feather wear, and that's in August. Or first year birds like the Acadian that Richard Rulander had, first year birds in May. They can be worn. So, never use, if you can't see the primary tips, you just can't use it. And so you have to inspect the birds, but with flycatchers, there really is no single field mark that in general will identify the bird for you. You've got to use all these things, or you have to narrow down or eliminate a few before you can use certain types of field marks. Okay, any more? We're going down.
I just want to say thanks as an eBird reviewer for bringing some clarity to something that's just so difficult.
Yeah, I just want to see some of these flycatcher things sorted out on the eBird. We're all still learning, even I'm still learning.
Yeah,
So-
Cin-Ty, the reviewers, I know me, we got to do some work on these. That graph you showed of Texas eBird in April, that's pretty painful.
Yeah, maybe we need to just, is there a way for all across Texas to put a red, if it occurs before April, then it gets flagged.
Well, we have a date. I just don't think the date is May 3rd is the problem. It's probably like April 27th or something. So probably need to move it.
Yeah, make it like May 3rd, and
Yeah.
we'll gradually sort this out. And
So Eric Carpenter is aware, and he's kind of working towards, he's taking a step at a time. I mean, that's just one of many problems. So
okay,
but we're on our way.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, we're pretty much ground zero for all of that.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. All right. Well, any other questions? I think that's probably it. It's already 10:30. Wow. You guys made it this far.
I'm going to switch to basketball now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll see you all later then.
All right. Good night.
Thank you, Cin-Ty.
Thank you, Cin-Ty.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.